Well, we're in the kitchen, but we're actually not preparing food for us. We are talking about, I guess, some ways that you can use squash and or pumpkins on a small scale to help supplement your livestock feed. So this is just kind of a brief overview of some things that we do to basically utilize squash as part of our livestock's diet. This is a very old-timey sort of technique. I mean, cows used to be fed on pumpkins. Now, you'll read into a lot of the more modern information available that it's not the most efficient use of space and it's not the most efficient feed for your livestock. But on a small scale, any food is food. And we're going to show you, just as we say, things that we do to make these squash, which are a very easy thing to grow and produce a lot of poundage of product, but to make these squash go a little bit further as part of your livestock's diet. So of course, the easiest option is to just feed basically the whole squash. Now, if you have larger livestock like cattle, depending on the type of squash and pumpkin, they might eat this quite readily. You'll probably have to smash it open. A lot of them, I mean, they're pretty hard on the outside, but that may be as simple as it is. Now, depending on what you have, for example, we have the sheep, certain types of squash, and this is where you'll have to experiment. We can kind of go through some of what we've learned and what our livestock will eat, but you will have to experiment. These big blue Cuber Maxima squash are fairly sweet. So we actually do find that the sheep, the Icelandic sheep, they can't break them open. Once they get to that point, they're not breaking them open. However, if we cut them in half or quarter them up or whatever, provided it's not ridiculously cold out, i.e. they don't necessarily like eating them at minus 20, but they will clean them out pretty good. So this is an example of a squash that our sheep eat quite well, and you can probably find some varieties that some of your bigger livestock will eat if you just wanted to feed it whole. Of course, feeding things whole doesn't work for every type of livestock in every situation. And different types of squash seem to, in our experience, have different palatability to the livestock. So these Canada crookneck squash, they're an interesting case because they're quite prolific. They produce a lot that we use. But when you get the area that has the seed, which is what this is, we still use this. But I'm going to say it, we find that we have a hard time getting through all the squash we grow. So we will sometimes put these bulbous ends that have the seeds in them aside. You can see this one in particular has been in the fridge for a little while. So we are going to process them a bit further. And as you can see over here, one of the ways that we find works really well is to peel them first. Now, butternut squash, Canada crookneck squash, all of these Cuber mustachio type squashes, they peel quite well. And one experiment that we found is our rabbits won't, if we just put this in the pen with them, they won't really eat it. They'll chew on it a bit, but if we peel it and we only give them the peels, they eat everything. So they're very picky, but if you were cooking this yourself to basically make squash fries or something similar, you're going to peel it anyways. So you're actually turning that waste product into something that the animals like to use. And here's some peelings from that squash I just showed you. You just use a normal peeler. And the rabbits eat this really well. Of course, we've also got some carrot peelings in there. Same sort of thing. Now, this is work. This is extra work. And this is why we're saying this is a small-scale way to supplement or substitute some of the diet. You wouldn't do this on a huge scale if you had hundreds of rabbits or something, because it wouldn't be feasible. But when you only have a small backyard herd, it's doable. And of course, once we get the peels off for the rabbits, this is where we're finding the Canada crooknecks quite usable. If we take this seed-filled end, which is usually a bit thinner, and we basically cut it open, take the seeds out. The seeds can easily go to the chickens, which we'll show you. It's pretty simple. And if we cube up the flesh, what's left, we find the sheep actually eat it quite well. So there, I've cut this squash open, and I'm sure most of you are familiar with the inside of a squash, but we just take all this part, seeds and all the little bits in between, scoop that out and sort of mix that into the chicken food for the day, and they usually eat it pretty well. By evening it's usually all gone. So there we go. We've got the innards of those three, basically seed ends of those Canada crookneck squash all scooped out. As I say, we'll just kind of plunk each one of those little scoops of stuff into their feed dish, and like I say, there won't be much left. So over here we have what's left. Now these are perfectly edible, so there's absolutely nothing wrong with this. It's just a case, we are coming up on mid-March, and squash doesn't keep forever. So we've eaten a lot. There's no question about that. But we're also trying to figure out ways, how can we preserve it, etc. But also just use it up. We don't really want it going bad. So this is also a time when fresh food for livestock is just non-existent. So why not? It then is no longer a waste product. So I'm going to go ahead and cube these up. Now we only cube them up for the sheep because we find if we put them in like this, they waste it to a degree because, let's face it, they don't have a great set of biting chompers. So if we cube it up, they can just kind of put it in their mouth and eat it. So again, it's extra work. All of this is extra work. But if you're doing it on a small scale, why not? And I see no reason, although I've never tried it, why goats wouldn't eat this too if you basically cubed it up into bite-sized bits for them. And it doesn't take a lot of time. This has probably taken me, I don't know, 5 minutes, maybe 10 minutes by the time I've filmed all this, because I've staged a few things a bit. But it takes time, but if it's decent food for your animals that you can grow yourself, I don't know, there's value there. This is kind of what we've processed from those three ends of Canada crookneck squash. So we've got chicken food, a few bits that are going to worms because they were a little moldy, but the worms won't care. We're going to grind that up later. We've got going to the sheep, the little cubes, and the rabbits are getting the peelings. Of course, that's not as many peelings as it looks because there's carrots under there, but all in all, you can make it go fairly far. You're not using this as a staple, but if you have it, why not use it? Because it's still going to reduce your feed cost and give them something nutritious in the winter. Alright, so first customer this morning. Here she comes over.
She's the worst of them. She is going to come.
Yep, and as you can see, she approves.
Munch, 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 munchy, munch, 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 munch.
It is one of those things. It's very interesting with the rabbits how they'll eat the peels no problem, but they aren't big fans of the actual flesh of the squash. And even ponies like cubed up squash. Well, it doesn't look like much, but that's going to be breakfast times 4, because we have 4 dishes for bringing the sheep in. And yeah, they'll clean that up all pretty quick. And everybody's in, pushing for their spot at the feeder. We've got to let some geese out. And as you can see, a few minutes later, it's all gone. They approve. That being said, they like the grain over the squash, but if you cut the grain with a little bit of squash, they still eat it just fine. Basically everybody seems to approve. The only animals we don't have, or that we have that don't really like it, are the geese. But that's alright. And of course, next is chickens. So I just take a ball like that. This is a smaller group. And put the grains in around it. And see, they will, they're going for the grains first, but there won't be any left. Basically all the sheep approve. And even if this is just a treat for this year, that's alright. Hypothetically, in the future, we could up the production and you might actually be able to feed them it fairly regularly. Well, another thing about squash, as I look at this horrible looking bowl full of discarded stuff, is all squash produce a lot of seeds. These are our yellow crooked neck squash, which are a summer squash. And all of these, we didn't really intend to end up with so many. As you see, we still have these to go through, some of which are going to be kept for proper seeds for basically replanting again this year. But we had about 20 that they got too far gone, to the point that we weren't going to eat them, and we just made a decision. Let's let them go. And part of why we left them is because what we are taking out of them in this bowl is livestock food. And really, we didn't have to do anything aside from let these mature and harvest it. So as we said, these have gone way past the point where you would eat them. And these were collected back in September, October, and they've stayed, for the most part, in pretty good shape. So I'm going to try to break one open here. I may have to come back to this and smash it. Smashed. So now that I've smashed it open, you can see there are lots of seeds in here. And this particular one does have some seeds we might actually keep for seed saving, but it's a little bit tedious, but all you're doing is taking them out. Now this is completely edible for humans. You could also just smash these for the chickens and let them eat it. You could smash it and let the sheep eat it, or goats. The only reason we're kind of putting them aside is because if we dry them, we can make them go a little longer. Because these won't have enough life left in them to last for months and months and months. So regardless of how you look at it though, there's multiple ways to go about this, and the seeds aren't a discard, essentially. They, out of any squash, winter squash, or in this case summer squash, could be a valuable livestock feed, but they can also be a human food. And that's something that we're actually going to experiment with a little bit more going forward. So kind of as a recap, I mean, this is a whole nother dimension of how squash can be put to work on your farm or homestead. You can grow squash specifically to feed to livestock, i.e. some of the bigger pumpkin-y type ones, that all you really have to do is grow it, harvest it, and smash it open or feed it to them. You can use pieces of squash that you would otherwise not eat, whether it's peels from skins. I'm going to say it, even when you store a lot of squash, they don't all keep perfectly, or the whole squash doesn't keep perfectly for the whole winter. So you could sort of salvage some of that to feed to the livestock, and you can also keep the seeds, and whether that's a human food, which is completely edible, or livestock food. Like I say, chickens love it. So you've got a lot of other ways to use squash as another crop that feeds both yourself and your livestock on a small scale. So that's pretty impressive. The chickens, the rabbits, and the sheep can all use various parts of our squash harvest. So,
And the cats.
I forgot to mention that actually too. We even do use some of, not a huge amount, but we do use some of the squash very similar to what you would use sweet potato in some of our cat food recipes, where we basically cook some of it and sort of grind it in with the meat, which kind of, it's sort of a healthy filler basically. And we actually have a couple of cats actually like it when we just roast the green striped Kershaw squash, for example, which they are sweeter. They'll just eat it. And another totally random thing, which we may touch on in the future, but even our guppies that we have will actually eat the squash. So we can literally feed squash to almost everything we have here.
Can you tell how much Chris loves squash?
Well, try putting squash to work on your homestead.